effectively says that you're covered by parliamentary privilege. So as long as what you tell us is you believe to be true, then there's no problems there. And I'm going to introduce us as the panel, and then I'll hand over to you to introduce yourselves for the record, and then we'll start our meeting. So I'm Deputy Montfortadier, I'm the chair of this panel.
I'm Deputy Max Andrews, panel member.
Anna Calvani, co-CEO of Jersey Hospitality Association.
And Marcus Calvani, the other co of the Jersey Hospitality Association.
Thank you and welcome. I know we saw you not so long ago on a different subject, so pleased to have you back.
Thank you.
As just for opening remarks, could you provide us a brief outline of some of the work you do with your organisation?
Yeah, of course. So we represent in an independent manner, so we're non-government funded, we're fully funded by our membership. Just over 200 member companies that represent around 400 or just over actual establishments on the island. We're broken up into 10 subsectors, each has a chair, and the chairs make up our board, so we have a kind of two-way, very easy communication to very specific areas of our industry. And we do all sorts. We lobby you guys, and we play nice with you guys, and we run delicious food festival and dine out, and we have monthly board meetings every month. We have monthly or every kind of 6 weeks the subsectors meet as groups themselves. So it's a very active kind of ongoing, daily, up-to-date kind of where we are as far as an industry and how we move it forward. We also sit as part of the
Visitor Economy Strategy Group.
Yeah. I don't know, we were
With economic
anything
development.
hospitality.
Yes.
Good.
Hopefully give you a sensible answer back.
Well, I think we've asked you to come in because clearly you're an important industry in Jersey that you represent. And at a very basic level, you provide services and products that need to be paid for, and people need to pay for that either using cash, card payments, contactless payments. Have you had any feedback so far about from your members about this area that we're looking at?
Yes, we have. We have overall sort of similar feedback. And as we briefly just discussed prior to, actual data per se, we don't have to present today. Our association obviously has the capacity, but not for the subject's resources to capacitate the actual data. Yeah. But we do have good general feedback and the industry's kind of opinion, if you will, on the subject, and we're happy to share that.
Great. So should we start with maybe what you think some of the benefits are, or potential benefits and challenges for either the non-acceptance or the acceptance of cash payments or digital payments in your industry? I accept it's a broad industry as well.
I think that the general feeling is that businesses should be allowed to choose and accept what they want. And there is a variety of payments and payment types, and I think customer bases as well that changes it. So we do still see quite a lot of tourists coming to the island, actually particularly French tourists that like to pay with cash. We do still see some of the older population on the island that very much still like cash in hand. Some people maybe like to budget themselves through cash. But in general, I would, the majority of payments are made through tap or card. And when it gets to the bigger transactions, hotel bills, larger meals out, wholesale purchases, they are inevitably hardly ever made with cash. So, we've had some feedback that anybody you're buying any kind of supplies from off island and you're a wholesaler on island, cash is almost a non-existent entity in that process because you have to wire money to off island and that side of it. So I think from our standpoint as an industry, we would be hesitant to support any removal of any form of payment. I think it's a case for each business to make their own choice. Yeah. I know some people have chosen to try and go cashless as far as kind of coffee shops and that kind of stuff, that it's smaller. I mean, at the end of the day, handling cash is difficult. It's a challenge when it comes to dealing with staff and making sure stuff doesn't go missing. It's a bit of an insurance nightmare. It costs money to bank it. You know, there's no question about the fact that tap and card is clearly the future. But I think at this stage, we're not at the future where you would remove it in its entirety from industry.
Yeah, there are presumably costs to all of these things and decisions. So there's a cost to using cash. There's presumably a cost to using cards, right?
Yeah.
Correct,
Can you actually talk us through some of those costs? That might be useful for us.
Yeah,
They
well,
don't have to be exact, but just
yeah, obviously with the cash, there's a process that each company is going to need to have in place as far as depositing, if it's on a weekly basis, if it's a bi-weekly, whatever the process is, it needs to be very much stringent in place, and the employees need to follow that as far as cashing out and banking and depositing all of that.
their bank
and
charges. So when you turn
Oh,
up with,
absolutely, yes, yeah, absolutely.
do you know roughly what would a bank charge?
It would vary from bank to bank.
Yeah.
There isn't a standard,
But a business account charges
but
you
a
to bank
big,
cash.
absolutely, always, yeah.
Does that lead to, say, businesses who have cash on premises, would they tend to keep it on premises safely until they've got a large enough amount, or would they use it to pay for other services?
They would need to keep afloat on a daily basis. So they have a standard, let's say, float of £100 or something if you're a cafe somewhere and you obviously need to give change to people, so you have change in your till. If you imagine, if you're a larger establishment in a hotel, and yes, it would. I think potentially, there's a process of a security kind of
There'd be a
process with
safe
the pick
on
up safe
site
on
and
site,
if you're taking a huge amount,
pay
you'd
somebody
have-
like G4S to transport the money, transport the funds. These are obviously bigger companies and chains that have an international or national sort of banking system that they all have to follow because they're a chain sort of business, an establishment.
The days of filling up bin bags with cash at the end of a night service is in a nightclub or bar are long gone. I think it would be safe to say that more than 75% of the transactions taken will be through card or contactless payment. So there's a relatively minimal amount of cash.
Yeah. Is there a particular type of demographic or customer that you associate with the use of cash?
I
If
don't
we're gonna
like to
generalise,
generalise,
yeah.
but I would say the older, more conservative tourist is probably your prime cash user, and then I think people who like to budget through cash. So I think some people like to say, this is the money I've got for the week, and they lay it out on a table, and it helps them to visualize it and have that tangible experience of spending.
Yeah.
But we also see maybe some younger child that doesn't have a bank account or tap, that goes to the beach with their friends, and the parents might give them a few pounds to buy an ice cream or that kind of thing as well. It's it's an easier way to control the spend of a child or somebody that you're responsible for at the same time, to give them that ability to have that independence but not go too wild.
And do you get the feeling, do you, as business owners and people who run businesses, or any of the people you represent, do you get the instinct that there's a preference towards one form of payment over the other?
I tried to go cashless. We tried it in multiple of our own establishments to go cashless, and I think what are the benefits? The benefits are nothing goes missing. Nothing has to be cashed up and closed out at the end of the night. So your point of sale system and your credit card takings match each other identically. So from an accounting and admin standpoint, it is far easier and far quicker. But you then get a customer that comes in and says, well, I've only got cash, and you're not going to turn your customer away and say, sorry, you can't have a drink or an ice cream or a dinner because you've only got cash. And I think we definitely don't want to see businesses turning away tourists, saying, actually, sorry, you can't have a meal, or they eat their meal and get the cash out and say, you can't pay like that. So I think it's there has been in the last 10 years a significant movement more towards contactless and card payments.
Especially since COVID, for sure. We know as consumers, you and I would know that you've seen that as well. That minimise that, a risk through.
So if we were to maybe categorise some of your members' businesses, so with restaurants, would it be normal that most would take cash and card payments?
Yeah.
If we go towards coffee shops, for example, small cafes,
trying to go more contactless and card, because the transaction amount is a lot smaller and it's quicker.
Yeah.
But I would imagine that if you went into one and you said, I really haven't got a card and I haven't got a phone, but I've got a £5 note in my pocket, you would find a very, very small number that would say, sorry, I'm not going to serve you.
Yeah.
And some do actually, especially since COVID.
Get the odd one.
Yeah, definitely. Because again, that's the systems that they've put in place for the employees to follow.
Yeah.
And it's about, making it easy for them. And unfortunately, I think customers have probably turned away with cash in hand.
I suppose it depends on the size of the business. If it's a
Yes, exactly.
business where the boss is on hand to be asked, is
Exactly.
that okay?
Yeah.
Whereas if it's a, I don't know, multinational where there is no
and
boss
there's
around.
policies there.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And what do you have an instinct about what proportion of your industry doesn't accept cash payments?
I think, Monty, it's more in the in those wholesale
Supply chain.
supply chain side is predominantly. I think
I don't think
It's
anybody
billed, isn't it?
does.
It's billed often enough.
Yeah, I mean it's billed, but even if they wouldn't, if some businesses they might not want to give you a 30-day credit or a 60-day credit, you might be
Settle up
what
there.
used to be cash on delivery.
Yeah.
But the cash on delivery is not actually cash on delivery. It's pay with your credit card or pay with your debit card before we bring the product to you. So I think the cash has gone from that side of industry as well.
Yeah, it takes the liability out of the delivery drivers that have to deliver that product to the venue.
You do see it. You still see cash in hotels. I mean, hotels are a very multi-dimensional business in the fact they might be running a restaurant in one area and a bar in another, and you've got the room sales. I think people still like to use cash for tips. Some of the time, I think they feel like it's more likely to go to the person they want to give it to, as opposed to putting it on a card and then relying on the business owner to give it to that particular employee or split it however they do.
We were going to ask about tips, so we could do it now. So has the demise in cash led to a different way to secure gratuity? So, for example, a service charge is more common now than they were in your industry as automatic.
I don't think they're more common. I think that the technology's changed, so you can set your kind of card reader up to automatically ask if you want to leave a tip. So you see some of them that say, do you want to add £1? Some of them actually say, do you want to round it up for charity? Some of them say, do you want to add a percentage on? So the tech has kind of advanced quite a lot. From our own personal businesses, we run a flat service charge inclusive anyway, and I think a lot of the industry has moved to that model, but I don't think it's had any kind of change or increase or decrease in tipping. Generally, tipping here is not a huge part of
what I mean is the automatic service charge being a product of less use of cash, you think?
No, I don't. I don't think so, because if I think back to us coming back, but when I used to come back and still work within the industry, a lot of the time it would say, a table of 6 or more, or a party of 10 or more will have 10% included. That was already there, but people were still paying those bills in cash, or you'd see all of the group dividing their bill up at the end of the night, or throwing in £20 or whatever it was into it. So I don't think that mentality of tipping has changed, but through cash or card. Do you?
No, I don't think so, but yeah.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thanks for that. It's not one of the fundamentals we're looking at, but I think it's an interesting side issue. And I guess the last question from me before I pass over to my partner in crime, Max.
Always good on cash.
Some of it's obviously a business call. There's a call, isn't there, to be made as to what the savings you might make by going cashless versus the business you might lose. So we have heard from some people in submissions who just say they won't go somewhere if they don't accept cash. What do you think that's is the industry live to that risk, and is it?
Yeah,
Potentially, but equally, you know, we don't want to see additional regulation put onto businesses to force them to only take certain type of payments, because again, I think ultimately as they see it, it should be up to what suits that business and what makes that business most productive and profitable to operate. And if those restrictions are put in the place, either to say yes or no to one payment or the other, then I think that makes it harder, really.
I think the businesses that you see much smaller transaction amounts, the percentage of money taken, I was about to say the percentage of money taken through cash would be higher, but it then splits into, is it traditionally operated or kind of operated in a modern style? And you see a coffee shop compared to like a beach kiosk. A lot of the beach kiosks are still taking cash. Some of the town-based coffee shops are the ones that are probably more predominantly cashless. So I don't think there's even any tie to the size of that transaction through the everyday consumer transaction as opposed to the wholesale side of it.
It's more the business's ethos of operating.
Yeah.
How, you know, their style of service or their brand, and just really how they wish to operate more than anything.
The feedback that we've had from people though is, you know, any payment should be allowed and it should be the business choice to make what payment is allowed. And I think anybody would say to you, it's inevitable that cash will eventually become non-existent, but let the consumer decide when they've had enough of cash and they're comfortable with a card, and it's probably generational. I think, you know, probably see another generation pass and they're just not going to even carry cash around in their pocket.
Yeah, no,
there is a conversation that I have had in the last week from a tourism standpoint, that actually our £1 note is one of the things that tourists love. So it's a bit like when you go to Disney World and you get Disney money. Our £1 note is almost this kind of funny money, and it's got a watermark with a cow in it. And the UK doesn't have a pound note, and so it's novel. And you know, it may be that actually we're getting great visitor economy benefit from this slightly funny money that we have that's different from other places as well. It makes it unique and makes it quite special.
I think there's a sense that, well, I don't know, you might agree or have evidence of people coming with a certain amount of cash and they like, I've got to spend this money. So if you've got £20 in your wallet, you've got to get rid of it because you can't spend it back in the UK.
Get rid of the Jersey ones. That's what they say. Get rid of the Jersey
Because
ones.
if it's on your card, you don't think like that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much, Chair. No, thank you very much for both of you being in attendance today. I just wanted to ask, from a business perspective, when, for instance, a business is looking, say, to deposit cash in the bank compared to the cost of transactions, digital transactions, what is the less costly option for a business in your experience?
Don't think there is, to be honest, because again, it comes down to what bank do you have set up, the rates that bank charge you for your transactions, your deposits, and then what credit card terminal system and provider you have set up, and again, the rates that you can negotiate as a business for every single transaction. So there are companies that pay more. For example, if as a consumer, you probably notice not everybody accepts American Express. It's because as a vendor, it costs more to set up with American Express. So there's variations of those card charges as a proprietor, as a business owner. So it just depends on what company you go with, and some obviously have better rates than others, and the negotiation power of the size of your business that has a say as well. So it's hard to really.
I'd say if you're really good at negotiating,
Yeah.
cashless will end up being cheaper. because just your, particularly from April the 1st next year onwards, just your hourly wage for people to count the cash, then it goes to probably the manager or to your account person that then takes it to a bank and deposits it, and the bank charges you for the deposit. If you take the labour time into it as well, it'll inevitably be cheaper to do it with a card transaction. But as Anna said, the card transactions and the percentages that businesses are being charged are literally all over the place. An extraordinary difference.
And have you noticed any trends, for instance, within the Hospitality Association of firms maybe banking with certain banks because they have more beneficial rates compared to others who are charging higher rates?
So I think if you, as a consumer, you will have seen that going out, the word sum up probably means something to you now, whereas a year ago or 2 years ago, you probably never heard of sum up. These digital online banks have entered the market and are aggressive when it comes to rates. I mean, hugely cheaper. You can buy your sum up credit card terminal, you can buy it by walking into WH Smith as opposed to having to take long-term leases contracts and all that kind of stuff. So the industry is definitely changing.
It's very agile, it's very creative. It's always, our industry moves really fast, and it's always going to try to adjust to not just the customer, but how the market is changing and to keep up with that.
And what feedback have you received from the stakeholders within the Hospitality Association about digital platforms that they have used, and has there been more positives than negatives?
There are limitations in Jersey, for sure, as a business owner, for sure.
That is one of the biggest problems. So Stripe, for example, which is a usable bank elsewhere, just can't really be bothered with Jersey too much because we're such a small place, and our regulation means that they're not currently approved. Now, that might not seem too much of an issue, but a lot of the other software that the industry uses is tied to only being able to do transactions with those things. So Open Table, where you make your dinner reservation, if you want to take a deposit to secure your reservation, Open Table only works with Stripe internationally. So locally, you can't take your transaction. So we've had to do a lot of work recently as an association with tech companies in Jersey to get IPs from OpenTable to be able to create online payment platforms that are locally based that can make it work. So there's a huge, I think, productivity inefficiency there when it comes to the regulation of these types of online banks on Ireland. And I think that's, it's a knock on our financial services industry is so heavily regulated that you then end up having an overly regulated rest of the island when it comes to other industries. And I think that does definitely impact.
So it sounds as if it's actually been an inhibitor.
Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt. But I think a number of years ago, Santander, for example, was a bank that was relatively unused in the island. Very difficult to bank with if you were a business because they've got no physical way of taking cash on Ireland, so it was only digital payments. But as the digital payment stuff has grown over the years, it's suddenly become a more popular bank to bank with because it's not so important to have to walk into the bank and deposit the cash.
Varies, they all vary.
From a government standpoint, I would definitely say, when we enter the world of cash free eventually, it's going to make stuff a lot easier because, from as far as salaries are concerned and tipping and all that kind of stuff, you can see it all. It's all very controlled. It's all very transparent. Digital point of sale systems have changed that a lot. The days of writing bills by hand and giving them to the customer is, 99% gone. So I think from an accounting standpoint and a transparency of what's going on in a business and where the money moves, it's definitely easier. But with a point of sale system, you hit the cash button, it tells you how much cash is supposed to be in the drawer below you at the end of each evening and that kind of stuff too. So these are very quite kind of regulated control measures for staff as well.
But when we're speaking about security of the monies for a business, and we look at, say, digital compared to cash, what concerns do you have, for instance, about the use of cash? And have there been any problems that have arisen, for instance, where people have maybe taken money from the till, etc., And has that been quite a predominant issue in the past?
It's been a,
Definitely,
it's
yeah.
been a huge issue historically.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, I think we were taught, we've probably entered the industry and grown up in the time of this transition between the two. But, you know, I'll say to our management, look out for this, look out for that, look out for the other, because you've seen just about every way possible that you can make cash vanish or inappropriately be used. And that tends to not be, you know, it's not as exciting for somebody who's going to be that way inclined to try and fiddle the system, because you can't actually end up putting anything in your pocket and making it vanish at the end of it. And again, I think, you know, we saw a lot of pressure as an industry from staff wanting to be paid in cash. That's starting to fade out. I think it's more of an acceptance that actually the business probably can't. We certainly wouldn't be able to. You know, if you have a big event and you've got a lot of staff working and you were expected to cough up all the money in cash at the end of the event, we just, you know, the consumer might not have paid anything in cash. There's literally no cash on the site. So, you know, that world has definitely changed, but we're in that transition period. I think we've gone through the kind of peak of it, and and there are still the odd, you know, you get the odd request, I'd like to be paid in cash. And in general, if you say, well, it's just not possible, they now say, okay, fine. So that's definitely dying out.
And in terms of, say, maybe the use of, say, digital payments, have you ever seen any problems, for instance, with different currencies being used, say, through like different platforms that maybe visitors are using and maybe it's been rejected?
No, I mean, those card processing companies in general, the more modern ones particularly, accept anything. So back to sum up again, accept everything. And I think you do still see some of the older generation who don't want to use tap. You know, I think my parents are definitely not the norm, but there's no way I could get my parents to put their credit card or banking card onto their phone or onto their watch and wander around tapping. They feel like that's, you know, utter violation of whatever they're trying to protect on the card. And despite you telling them that actually it's safer a million times over, it's, you know, there's definitely not that comfort level. So I think, again, that's a kind of transitional, generational change. And we have a very good Wi-Fi, you know, system on this island in general. We've got very few spots where we don't have data and that kind of stuff. And I think the only other problem that we may see, but it doesn't impact the payments, is roaming differential between Jersey and you know, mainland Europe. And so you've got a tourist that comes over not expecting to be in a roaming area, and suddenly they are, and they might not be able to access their banking, you know, app or that kind of stuff, but the tap is still going to work. So it's, you know, I think it is, again, those regulations that we have in the island of not roaming with other areas and that kind of stuff that probably cause any of the minority of challenges that are seen.
And in your experience with, say, some of the firms that are part of the Hospitality Association, those who only accept digital payments, are they speaking positively about the changes that they've made since they've gone cashless, or are there maybe some reservations with the changes that they've made in their business?
It's one of those moves that I think takes, you know, it's an uncomfortable or uncertain move to make. It's much like a lot of change moves within our industry on Ireland, and we tend to say with all of them, if everybody does it together, it's a lot less painful or a lot less, you know, worrying. Number of years ago, if you charged for a reservation, there would have been a hullabaloo made by customers, whereas it's become more of a norm. And I think as people now walk into cash-free environments, there's definitely still going to be some people who will kick up a moan about it, but they're very, very much in the minority. But in Jersey, that minority is very good at making a big noise. As I'm sure you guys as politicians are aware.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we're getting through most of the areas very well, so thank you for that. One area that was highlighted to us is the consideration of hygiene when handling cash. And that was, of course, at the forefront of people's
COVID,
minds
yeah.
in COVID. So have you got any thoughts on that aspect, especially in your industry, which might involve food preparation or serving?
Yeah, that certainly had made a difference as far as processing transactions in general, because the venues that were just on cash, it definitely put them on the platform of switching. That whole experience of, you know, making sure customers are safe, making sure that the employees are safe. So the use of cashless and card transactions have certainly increased since COVID.
I remember my mother telling me it's filthy stuff. So yeah, I mean, it is. You know, at the end of the day, it is. You know, it's passed around hand to hand to hand. I'm not sure how much better a plastic note now is to a non-plastic note before, but you know, anything like that, I'm sure there's probably a counter argument that our immunity is going to suffer as a result of not all touching each other's cash. But as Anna said, I think the people who got used to it and took that leap of faith because it was forced into them during COVID have probably remained in that,
Definitely.
you know, in that
I
realm.
don't think they've really gone back, because again, you have to keep up with the market, the trends, and what your customers are asking for. In the past, where, you know, just, you know, 3, 4, 5 years ago, when you would go up to a register and they would say, oh, no transactions with a card unless it's over £5 or unless it's over £10. Now all of that's kind of diminished as well. You can just go through and buy a pack of gum for £1, that's fine.
I agree.
So that, you know, that's kind of eliminated that. So it just kind of sped up that process of people kind of getting onto the technology that most other destinations use.
And specifically to answer your question, I think I'm just trying to think, there's very, very few points within the industry where the cash transaction crosses with the food production.
Of course, yeah.
So, you know, normally the cash would be being dealt with. I mean, yes, the front of house employee may take the cash, not wash their hand before they carry the plate out, but the actual plating of the food is very rarely, or the preparation of the food is very rarely done by the same person that takes.
There might be places like ice cream vans, I'm thinking.
That's about the only thing I was just thinking, that where you might touch the cone and also touch the pound note, but other than that, I can't really think of many.
Yeah, like maybe a little sandwich shop or something like that, maybe. But
So I guess to come to the crunch, because these are going to be the fundamental decisions that we have to make recommendations. We will be making findings and recommendations to government, and this will all be based on the evidence we've received. So there's quite a strong push from a lot of the submissions and survey results that we've had. Admittedly, they're self-selecting, but people are saying that they strongly would like to keep both cash and card in use, and that they would even like us to recommend that to mandate the use of cash and acceptance of cash by businesses. So a series of questions on that really for you. First of all, if government were ultimately to say, certainly for an interim period, that businesses should accept or have to accept cash, would that be manageable for your industry, and what would the challenges be for your industry?
So I think we could comfortably say no to that mandate, because should government accept cash and card? Yes. Because everybody in society might need to pay government somehow in some other way. But I think as an independent business, you should be entitled to choose how you operate.
So that's I mean, this is equally valid. So the philosophy behind it, I think we are interested in. So we can look at that now.
And it's up to the customer's choice then. If they feel that that business doesn't provide the service or the offering that they wish to see, then they can choose to go elsewhere equally.
Are there any products or services that you think should be safeguarded from a cash point of view? So like our previous guest, for example, said that if someone has monopoly status, So, for example, if it's should we say a ferry company, or if it's an electric company, that you're the only one in the island. If it's a service that you can only
Yeah.
get from one person.
I think there may be an argument for that. I mean, I don't think there's any monopolies in our industry. Specifically, you say ferries, there's more than one operator technically, but yeah, I get where you're going with it. But I think
I know most people wouldn't pay for a ferry by cash, but
yeah,
if you did,
and could you actually buy your aeroplane ticket with cash? I'm not sure. I mean, it'd be interesting to go and figure out if you could. It's probably unlikely who you'd ever even find to buy it from.
Yeah.
So I think there isn't much. I don't think there is much monopoly, and I think Anna is right in the fact that if you, as a consumer, feel so strongly that I'm not going to support a business that has decided to go cash free, you have the choice to go somewhere else, and you have the choice to decide not to go to them. And
what if all coffee shops in Jersey said that we're not taking cash? You can't really go anywhere else for your coffee.
Yeah, I just don't think. I think at this stage we're not at that. We're not at that point. I think the consumer has still got to be able to choose, and the business owner has got to be able to choose. And there's that matching up of relationship and trust level there from consumer and supplier. But I think that we would be strongly against trying to mandate a cash-free hospitality industry. While there's great arguments on productivity and digital tech and the future.
Yeah.
The reality is we're not there yet.
What about the other way around? If we were to say, if government would say you have to accept cash, you don't. Is that a step too far as well?
Yeah, I think again it's too much regulation from government. Let the business owner choose. Well, because again, you might, as we said before, you might have moved your business to Santander, for example, and now suddenly you guys have said you have to take cash. You've got nowhere to put it. You can't bank it. So you've made those operational choices to remove cash out of your, and there are, there's probably arguments in some businesses where there is operational efficiency and productivity increased by not having cash. You might have to have one less person, or one less driver, or one less person in your bookkeeping department as a result of not having that cash element. So I think we have to let the business choose.
And so for those people who just don't have bank accounts, or haven't got either don't have the digital literacy or just want to use cash, is that how should government address that?
If they're willing to run a business and pay tax, we should be celebrating and opening doors and telling them how can we help.
Okay. And so if there are people, just individuals in society who are not yet digitally literate, that's really a job for government to help them, and maybe for.
I think going forward, you will. I think you just naturally will be. It's not a hard transactional. It's not a hard transitional change to go from cash accepting to cash free. There's not huge technological training that's needed. But in the same way that the person that wrote the bill by hand 10 years ago is probably now comfortable pressing a till. That process naturally happens, and our industry is fast at change. But I think our industry is also heavily unnecessarily over-regulated, and so extra regulation is not going to be something that would be supported.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. A number of submissions that we received as a panel raised concerns about privacy over digital payments. So I just wanted to ask you, as obviously a businessman and businesswoman, whether that is a misconception, and if so, could you just provide clarity on, for instance, what you would see on your accounting sheet when transactions are processed?
You wouldn't see.
No.
You wouldn't see a customer's number, credit card number or debit card number. None of that. Even when we get your statement, our statements through from the credit card company, the most anybody would ever show is the last 4 digits of that. So if a customer calls and say, I need a refund on something, then you can match them with that, and then provide them a refund. But no, I mean, in this day and age, I'm sorry, technology is very well versed in these areas, and as big companies provide these systems, they would not
No.
put those systems in place.
I'm interested by those statements
Yeah.
though, because I'm not convinced that's the privacy they're talking about. I think it's more about I think it's more about I don't want to be known that I went to somewhere, and if I pay with a card, then they know that I was there, or it's going to pop up on the credit card bill, and the person I didn't want knowing where I had been might then see where I'd been.
Yeah.
That's not really an issue for our industry. There is, there's plenty of that in our industry, and we have to be professional about whether you pretend like you haven't seen that person the day before or not. But I think Anna is correct. From an actual transactional standpoint, you can't see something. It's not like we could take a transaction and show up at your house tomorrow. There just isn't that information. It's very protected.
Yeah. From, say, a reconciliation perspective, it's probably easier, say, with digital transactions compared to cash transactions. Obviously, at the end of the day, you need your staff to be there to obviously do that manual labour.
Yeah.
So would you say the reason why certain firms are still providing cash as an option is due to the consumer demand for cash input? Is there maybe any other reason as well?
Definitely, yeah.
Definitely. I think it's the only reason.
The only reason.
We're here as an industry to make customers happy, and the only reason that you'd be taking cash is to try and make as many customers happy as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Because from an operation standpoint, it is way easier to not have it. I mean, you can almost not be there and know exactly what you've taken and exactly how it's been taken, and it reconciles. I mean, a lot of the time now you can just automate the entire process through to your P&L.
Yeah. And I also just have to ask as well, because we've been asking previous stakeholders this question, do you believe there's a need for the government to bring forward legislation in regard to cash being transacted, and maybe to then protect certain susceptible individuals who might be vulnerable?
Go further with that.
So there has obviously been concerns when we're looking, for instance, at a cashless society. We've seen, for instance, the World Economic Forum predicate, a cashless society is the way forward. But there are also maybe more vulnerable stakeholders, for instance, who might not have, say, a bank account.
Yeah.
And so should the government bring forward legislation to protect certain individuals and to basically elucidate businesses as to what they can be transacting in terms of digital or cash?
I don't know what legislation there is at the moment associated with it, but I think we would strongly say that the government should enable, if cash is still something that exists, globally, then we should be accepting cash. And then it's down to the business whether they choose it or not. But absolutely, there are people that are not able to open a bank account for various reasons. There's a reason why cash still has its place, and while it might be becoming the minority, there is still the need for it. So, and I think particularly for service-driven stuff. So if I've got to come and pay my rates, or something that's governmental that everybody has to do, that's not of choice. A lot of what our industry provides is something that could probably be argued is of choice. But a fundamental thing that medical care or paying your rates or that kind of stuff, I think you've got to have it open for everybody to pay in whatever way they need to.
No, thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. I think that's largely the end of the question. I've just got a couple of small questions. Have you seen an increase in the use of Revolut, and is there a demographic that uses Revolut?
Definitely, yeah.
The tourists who come to you.
UK tourists use Revolut.
Yeah.
Do they?
There's a bit of Revolut. There's a bit of.
That's interesting.
There's all sorts.
Stripe is one of them. Revolut's one. There's a handful
quite a few.
Is Revolut available in the UK? Sorry, outside the UK.
I'm not quite sure actually.
In Europe.
There's Starling.
So.
It's another one. There's a lot of these
Yeah.
digital banks.
Digital banking is huge in
And
a
do you
lot
think
of
that's-
parts of Europe and continental
Yeah.
Europe as well, yeah.
It's interesting that UK tourists would use Revolut, isn't it? Because they presumably, maybe they think coming to Jersey is a foreign place, or maybe it's just a way of budgeting for their holiday.
I think some people
But-
only use. We
Yeah.
have one employee
Yeah.
that I know specifically that only has a Revolut bank account. So we pay them into their Revolut bank account. They only bank with Revolut.
Yeah.
They've shut their whatever it was high street bank.
Yeah.
Definitely,
account.
and it is, as you said, more generational. So the younger demographic are choosing digital banking system. And it might not have anything to do with Jersey, but they're able to have it by, living here in Jersey, to have that account open. And they definitely choose that. Plus, for a traveller, if you look into it, it actually gives you better rates. So if they need to exchange, from pounds to euros, it gives you a better rate. So they use those sort of banks, yeah.
And do tourists ever try and or ask to pay in euros or other foreign currency?
Rarely, but you do get it. I mean, we used to get it a lot when we ran the small coffee booth at the harbour, because it's right there at a point of transportation and entry. You would get asked that a lot more. I don't.
And would you take euros?
Well, it becomes a nightmare, because then banking it is so
You
you can't bank the
it
coin
here.
at all.
So here in Jersey, nobody would take the euros. So it was a nightmare as a business.
You could bank the notes, but you couldn't bank the coins.
Yeah,
So years ago, we took a bag of coins to Europe to change them for notes to bring them back to bank them, because you physically can't deal with it on islands. So, from that standpoint, no, a complete and utter nightmare. But again, maybe, we are an industry that wants to make people happy. So, if you've got some nice, tourists standing there and they've got nothing other than their euros to pay for their whatever they've bought that's not that much, you're gonna be hard pressed to turn around and say, no, you can't have it. Go
You
home.
find a use for the euros one way or the other.
Well, you probably
you
go
may have
back
to
to
spend them
France,
yourself.
go back
yeah.
to Europe and give them back to them.
Yeah.
But from an accounting standpoint, again, a nightmare. You're at that stage, your reconciliation of your takings to actually what you've got is going to be off, and a lot of these systems, if you're off by, 2-3 euros, it's a nightmare. And there's certain levels that you can put into the system where you might have an employee that's closing out the till, and if that till's off, they cannot close it out. Because they're not they haven't got enough of the seniority in the system. So it just adds in a whole world of complication that going cash free doesn't have. But again, as we said, I think we do it because there is still consumer demand for it at this stage.
Great, thank you. Have you got any questions? No. Any questions for us? Any further points?
no, really, I think.
What year do you reckon we're going cash free?
I think whenever we're in these sort of situations representing our members, representing the industry, our message does tend to be similar. The less regulation, the better. That's kind of like the moral of the story. It's important for the businesses because they're so diverse, and the sizes and the number of employees they have and the processes. There's so much to consider. And then the more regulation we put in place, the harder it makes for them to operate day to day. So overall, that's kind of the moral.
Interesting, a payment form that has really died out fast is the cheque.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
You very, very rarely see a cheque. So I think there is a natural progression of a payment style that I think we can just naturally sit back and let it happen as opposed to try and regulate it.
Yeah. Good, thank you.
Right, pleasure, thank you.
I think we're happy to end this part. Thanks again for coming.
Pleasure.
Pleasure.
Nice
Thank
to
you
see
for
you.
having us.
Yeah, thank you.
All good.
We're having some technical issues, so we're not ready to stop the recording.
We're still going to carry on.
Cool.
Feel like we should do
Next time.
song and
That's
dance.
all right.
I can stop the audio, I just can't stop the video.
Okay.
So
Yeah, probably the other way around we prefer.
turn all your mics off and everything.
We'll
Okay.